I thought of growing up as having a really regular life, but things changed when I turned 14. After my mother chose to wed Greg, his son Jason, 3 years older than me, along came with her. Jason was already challenging at 17. To say we didn't get along would be an understatement. Problems existed right from the beginning. At first, it was the usual stuff. Arguments over who had to clean what, vanished shampoo bottles, and even battles over whose turn it was to do the dishes. Jason was entitled, hapless, and reckless. He left his belongings all about, yet I was always the one being screamed at somehow. Greg wasn't hesitant about expressing his annoyance at me, and my mother let it all slip while caught in trying to build a picture-perfect home. Anytime I tried to defend myself, it seemed like speaking to a brick wall. Greg had a way of making everything seem as though my fault. Things deteriorated a year later when my mother and Greg declared they were expecting a kid. At that point, everything truly began to spin out. The house needed restructuring suddenly, and guess whose room they changed into a nursery from? Mine. I was pushed into a small guest room not big enough for my desk and bed. It was like a slap in the face, a plain statement of my position in this new family structure. Jason got even more intolerable when the new baby came. He left college and returned home carrying all his bad habits and dubious friends, late-night gatherings, visitors in the house around the clock, and thundering music at 3 a.m. started to become my new reality. I pushed myself into school. When I tried to bring it up to Greg or my mother, they either shrugged it off or gave me pitying looks as if saying, "What can we do?" It became my haven from the craziness right here. I signed up for extra lessons, joined every club I could, and stayed as often as possible at friends' homes. Anything to help one stay away from returning to that disorderly house? It was survival. It was not a youthful revolt. One night especially still comes to me clearly. Having stayed late at school working on a project, the house was empty, too quiet, when I eventually arrived home. Notes on the refrigerator said they had left for a family supper. A family dinner I was not invited to. It was as though I didn't exist unless they wanted someone to attribute blame for things going wrong. Not long after my 18th birthday arrived, my breaking point arrived. Working part-time to save for some freedom and education, I discovered my room wrecked one evening when I got home. My room became ground zero when Jason had a party while the parents were out. Beer stains everywhere, a broken lamp, and my project notes strewn all about the floor. When I approached them at breakfast the following morning, Greg answered coldly instead of apologizing. He remarked, hardly glancing up from his dish, "You should have been more careful with your things." My mother simply sighed and said something regarding family sticking together. But I was done. I was not going to continue allowing things to slide. Those years seemed like everything I did was under close inspection, not in a useful, let's guide you, though kind of approach either. More like they were waiting for me to screw up. Jason, in the meantime, could not do anything wrong. By then, he was almost a professional couch potato, often lounging about as I tried to keep my head above water. I recall working on a big science project that meant the world to me. Neither of which I could obtain at home was space or silence. It was like attempting to work in the middle of a circus, as I tried arranging in the corner of the living room. Greg kept lecturing me about making a mess. Jason's music was loud. My little brother was running about shouting. "You are occupying too much space," he would say. It was irritating. One day, I was at last tired. Having packed my project, I visited a friend's place. Her parents were wonderful. They let me set out my work in their dining room and greeted me with wide arms. I felt as though I could think clearly for the first time in many years. My companion noted my facial relief. "Here," she added, "you are always welcome." And that small action meant the world to me and served as a wake-up call. Normal was not what this was. A house should be a secure haven, rather than a location you are running from desperately. I started working more hours at my job going forward. Every hour away from home was a tiny respite from pollution. Greg found it terrible. He would usually rave about how it was ruining my academics, but I understood the true reason. I wasn't around for him to point out flaws and assign guilt. Realizing I had a way out as I saved, though it would not be easy, moving out was beginning to seem as the only choice. Though I knew they wouldn't take it well, I was worn out walking on eggshells. I felt as though my heart would explode that day I was leaving. I sat them down to break the news after discovering a reasonably priced tiny apartment not far from the university. I said, trying to project more confidence than I felt, "I'm moving out." The quiet in the room was intolerable. Greg spoke first, and his voice carried sarcastic slights. "At your age, do you believe you are ready to live alone?" With her face unreadable, my mother simply stared between us and said nothing. "I am," I said with great conviction. "I need my own space. I have saved up." The ensuing was a nasty fight. Greg charged me with escaping from my obligations and of not appreciating things, saying, "He looks up to you, you know." He even tried to guilt me about leaving my little brother behind. I resisted. This was about need for my sanity and well-being, not about wanting my own place. The following several days passed in a haze of packing. Though it was embarrassing, my mom assisted. We barely spoke. All of it was surface-level exchanges like, "Do you need additional boxes? Anything to help you escape the actual problem? I can give you some old kitchen stuff." I felt a flood of emotions when I at last locked the door to my new flat. Relief, melancholy, thrills, and anxiety. I really was on my own. Though it was terrible, it also released something. The first several evenings were trying. The silence was nearly intolerable, and I discovered I missed even the turmoil of my former house. Still, as time went on, I came to value the calm. I could eat when I wanted, sleep without disturbance, and come and go as I pleased. Outside the continual pressure and criticism, it felt like I was at last finding who I was. I kept busy with job and education while I adjusted to my new life and cut off from my family. Though not perfect, our relationship was under control as long as I wasn't living under their house. At last, things were beginning to look good. One evening, then, I received a call from Mom. She sounded depressed, which was unusual. "Your stepdad has been considering his will," she remarked. "He had opted to leave everything to Jason and your half-brother rather than you. Not that I was expecting anything, but hearing it so straightforwardly stung. It was the message rather than the money. Years of attempting to fit into a family that excluded me from their list of members had passed. The will was only the last nail in the casket. I tried to discount it, but that talk tormented me. It felt as though every insecurity I experienced growing up in that house returned rapidly. I started withdrawing even more, cutting back on visits, and concentrating on the people, my friends, teachers, and colleagues, who really made me feel valuable. But something occurred that turned everything around just as I felt I had at peace with everything. A few months after I had cut off contact with my family, something utterly unanticipated occurred. One evening, working on some school homework, I was seated at home when a lawyer called. The name set no bells, hence I became instantly tense. Still, I responded with curiosity. "Is Emily here?" the voice asked, businesslike and official. "Indeed, this is her," I said warily. He presented himself as representing the estate of my grand-aunt, the aunt of my father whom I had not considered in years. Among those relatives I hardly knew growing up, she was the kind you would only hear about at family get-togethers but hardly saw. Though we were not close, I had hazy recollections of seeing her when a child. From what I recall, she was gentle but reserved. She had no children of her own. "I'm calling to let you know your grandaunt passed away," the attorney stated, his voice relaxing somewhat. I stared, trying to make sense of what he had just said. "She left her whole estate to you." My head flew. "Why me? Why now? I knew her little at all." He kept detailing the specifics before I could say anything. Far more than I could have dreamed, my grand-aunt had been financially well off. Over the years, her investments had appreciated, and she now possessed a sizable estate valued roughly $3 million, and it belonged entirely to me. I had no idea what to say for a moment. It was strange, like I had happened into someone else's life. Sadness for her death, remorse for not knowing her better, and a weird sense of incredulity over inheriting such a large sum of money from someone I hardly knew mixed together. The attorney then went on to say that my grand-aunt had appreciated my will to create something of myself and my autonomy. She remarked in a letter she saw a lot of herself in me. Strong, autonomous, and ready to battle for her own road in life. Let alone from someone I hardly knew, it was the kind of thing I never expected to hear from any member of my family. Over the next few days, I was whirled through meetings with estate planners, financial consultants, and attorneys. I had to go through assets, stocks, and a few personal stuff she left for me. To put it mildly, it was taxing, but concurrently it presented an opportunity. I felt as like I really could control my future for the first time in my life. Having a house, something little but cozy, made me realize how great it felt to at last have my own space. No more claustrophobic guest rooms. No more sense of me being pushed out of a family that did not want me. This house belonged to me. Every room seemed to represent a fresh beginning. Thinking ahead to long-term financial stability, I also bought a rental house. I wanted to make sure this money worked for me and wasn't simply thrown away. It lasted. The rest I save and invest, being careful to consult experts in fields relevant to me. I was not going to let this chance pass by. I held the news to myself for some time, mostly because I wanted no turmoil. I kept this from my family, but secrets have a tendency of leaking out, and my cousin discovered out not long afterward, and the word got out quickly once she knew. My phone was flashing with calls and messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years within a few days. It was first subtle. Acting as though she wanted to catch up, my mother called, but I sensed something was wrong. She was asking too many questions about my financial situation and overly fascinated in my life. The talks then shifted from informal check-ins to clear requests. Hinting that they wanted a portion of my fortune, my stepdad began phoning and requesting loans to help with their house repairs. Jason, who hadn't seen me in months, suddenly wanted to reconnect, which was only code for requesting money. Looking at me, everyone seemed to see dollar signs. They only wanted a piece of the pie. They had no interest in my life or situation. At the same time, it was heartbreaking and irritating. These were folks who had spent years making me feel like I didn't belong. Now that I had something valuable, they wanted back into my life. My mother unexpectedly dropped over one day. I assumed she would try to have one of those let's talk moments because I hadn't seen her in weeks. But I knew she wasn't here for that as soon as she walked in. She sat down to discuss how they were having financial difficulties, how Jason had returned to college once more and was aggravating her at home. She said how my stepdad's health had affected their finances and how the private school costs for my little brother were draining their resources. She was not subtle in the direction of this talk. She turned to face me directly at last and said, "We're family, Emily. You know we have gone through a lot together, and I believe it is only just that you support us. We could very much use $1 million. It's not as though you could afford it right now." My heart dropped. Right there was the big ask. She focused on the money, not on me. The same mother who had let Greg shove me aside for years now wanted me to save them. Also $1 million? She seemed to believe I would just toss it like pocket money. I fixed her, trying to keep my voice cool. "Mom, this money is not for you, for me as well. You want to grab what I have finally for myself after years of attempting to find my own path?" She didn't take it well. "You have made it very evident for years that I am not truly part of this family." Her face hardened, and she started ranting about how unappreciative I was and how I had no right to hang on to the money, as it essentially came from my father's side of the family. Saying it was my duty to look after Jason and my little brother since we were family, she even tried guilt-trip me. I was done. Now that I had the opportunity to live my life on my own terms, I was not going to let them pull me back into that mess after spending too many years trying to fit into a family that did not want me. Her storming out of my house marked the end of our chat after I told her no, firmly yet gently. Not long afterward, the calls from Jason and my stepdad become more unpleasant. They were demanding rather than inquiring now. Not having done anything with his life, Jason told me I owed him for all the years I had shared the same roof. About how I couldn't just abandon my family now that I had money. My stepdad sent me long, guilt-tripping notes. Actually, though, years ago they had turned away from me. They just gave me importance today since I have something they desired. The last straw came when my mother texted me, pushing me over the line. telling me I didn't deserve any of the inheritance. She accused me of being a selfish thief. Over and over I read the message, my stomach turning with a mix of grief and rage. People who were meant to love and help me, my family, were calling me names since I refused to turn over money that was rightly mine. That evening I banned her phone. I have nothing else to pick from. They were not going to stop, hence I had to defend myself. Though emotionally taxing, the next 3 days were also clarifying. I came to see that this was about establishing limits and, at last, advocating for myself, not about money. I cut all correspondence with them in the next few weeks. The calls stopped completely, finally, slowing down first. It was a relief, but it also confirmed what I had always feared, that my worth to them was determined more on what I could offer than on who I was. Though it hurt, I knew I had made the correct choice. I felt free to live on my own terms, unburdened by their expectations for the first time in my life. Following the break with my family, I felt the drama had at last stopped. I erred. A fresh turn was thrown my way just as I was beginning to get used to my new schedule and appreciate the calm of not having to cope with their continual needs. It began with a formal-looking letter mailed from a law firm I had never heard of, stamped and sealed. My heart fell when I opened it, first thinking it could have something to do with the estate of my grandaunt. I was under litigation by my mother. Indeed, you heard correctly. My own mother had sued me, alleging entitlement to a share of my fortune. I recall sitting there, incredulity fixed on the letter. Although I knew my mother had been offended by my not giving her any money, I never would have anticipated her going this far. Since the bequest came from my father's side of the family, the lawsuit argued that theoretically she owned it. Though it was an absurd debate, she obviously was in great need. She only wanted her hands on the money. She had no regard for its legitimate leaving to me. Not long after, my stepdad messaged me as though the lawsuit was not sufficient. One of those long, ranting books loaded with guilt-tripping and manipulation. He tried to play the victim, stating that they had always treated me like one of their own, and that I was the one destroying the family by not doing the right thing. He warned me I would regret not sharing the money, and that I was being selfish. I could see the irony. Now informing me I had an obligation to take care of them, this same man had cut me out of his will as I wasn't real family. It was virtually ridiculous. Though furious as I wasn't about to let them harass me into caving in on what properly belonged. I showed my attorney the letter and phoned right away. He chuckled, really, one glance at it. He claimed the action had no validity and that my mother lacked legal leg to support her position. The will was perfect. My grandaunt had confirmed that. Still, it did not lessen the tension in the circumstances. I never imagined I would have to cope with having to go through a court fight with my own mother. The next several days were a haze of documentation, calls, and legal sessions. He gave me his word that we would win the lawsuit, but the whole process saps me. How had things gotten this bad? I kept wondering. How had the lady meant to love and encourage me, my own mother, to become someone who considered me as nothing more than a money account? It was not only the lawsuit either. Distant relatives, individuals I hadn't heard from in years, began calling me. My mother reportedly had been telling everyone I had stolen the inheritance, and they were all anxious to let me know how let down they felt in me. It felt as though my family had evolved into a band of vultures circling around, waiting for me to cave in. I filtered most of their numbers. The never-ending assault of guilt trips and manipulation was intolerable to me. Still, the stress persisted even when the phone calls ended. Not much I could do about it. My mom was out there dragging my name over the dirt. All I could do was wait for the lawsuit to be settled and hope things would calm down following that. I turned mostly to my buddies at this period. The only people that really had my back were they. They let me see that my mom and stepdad's actions were about their own avarice and entitlement, not about me. Actually, that was just what I needed when one of my best friends advised we travel to escape everything. Since the inheritance drama began, I had not taken any time for myself, and the thought of briefly fleeing sounded like a dream. We packed, then started down the road. It was nothing fancy. just a straightforward road trip to a few sites we had always discussed visiting. Still, the change of landscape was exactly what I needed. I could breathe for the first time in months. We hiked throughout national parks, ate at little restaurants, and simply savored the freedom of being far from all the family turmoil for days. What do you want to do with the rest of your life? My friend asked me one of our hikes when we were seated on a rock gazing down a valley. Though it looked like a basic enough question, it really touched close. I hadn't really considered what I wanted. I had spent so much time attempting to defend what I had inherited from my family and coping with their stupidity. My life had been about survival, surviving the poisonous surroundings at home, surviving the emotional upheaval of being rejected and pushed aside, surviving the abrupt inheritance and all the baggage that accompanied it for the longest period. But truly, what did I want? I wanted to lead what kind of life? That trip let me have time to consider those issues. I came to see that, unlike most people, I had the ability to mold my destiny any way I chose. I felt more focused than I had in a long time when I returned from the trip. I had the financial stability to do things on my terms, and I was not going to allow anyone, family or otherwise, to take that away from me. I had quit allowing the tactics of my family to rule me. I realized I had to cut relations with them permanently, even though the case would not go anywhere. They had shown me who they were, and guilt-tripping or family obligations would not be able to alter that. The next several weeks saw things calm down. My lawyer managed the litigation, which was dropped virtually right away. Just some sleazy individual they paid to intimidate me. My mom's attorney was hardly a real danger. Once the matter was thrown out, I considered perhaps, just maybe, that would be the last of it. Of course, though, it was not. The dismissal did not go down with my mother and stepdad. Accusing me of severing the family and committing a major error by not distributing the inheritance, my stepdad sent me a long, sour email. I would regret it one day, he added, realizing how crucial family is, and by then it would be too late. I gave no thought to answering. There was no meaning. I was not going to allow them to draw me back into their poisonous games. They were not going to change. Though it hurt, cutting them off was the best choice I have ever made. Their relentless hostility helped me to at last pay attention to myself and my future goals. I began working on items I had put off for years, including real estate investments and classes on topics truly appealing to me. Along with this, I started helping neighborhood businesses, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time or means for. Returning to the community made sense, like I was using my inheritance to do something significant. It enabled me to turn my attention from the family strife towards something upbeat. The stinging of my family's treachery began to diminish with time. Sometimes I still wondered how my mother could have gone from the person I looked up to someone who considered me as nothing more than a source of income. Those ideas, though, lost influence over me. Not what I could give them. I was moving on, creating a life for myself, and surrounded by people who really loved me. Then something astonishing occurred. I got a letter in the mail, this one from my younger half-brother rather than from a lawyer. At just 14, his letter was honest, but awkward. In it, he said he missed me, and he didn't want things to be this way, and apologized for all that had happened. Though little, it meant more to me than anything else my family had produced. I came to see that in spite of everything, I did not want to close the door on him totally. Still young, he was caught in the center of all this turmoil, and perhaps, just maybe, we could reconstruct some sort of relationship. We began chatting sporadically, nothing more than a light chat on his interests and education. Though little, it was a beginning. From there, I wasn't sure where things would go, but I knew I was open to the prospect of reconnecting with him in a way that would be good for both of us. As it happened, life was much quieter, devoid of family strife. And for the first time in years, I approved of that. Their acceptance, affirmation, or money-driven adoration was not what I needed. I had created something better, a life in which I was in charge, surrounded by people who loved me for me, not for what I could produce. By the time everything calmed down, I had come to grips with the fact that my life would never have the kind of family support I so yearned for. Rather, I had created my own family via friends, mentors, and those who really cared about my welfare, not what I could offer them. A few months after my half-brother and I began messaging more frequently, I got another call from him. Even with this fresh sense of serenity, there was still one more surprise awaiting me. Though he was a teen juggling personal issues, his voice this time seemed different. He sounded more deliberate, more sober. A little reluctant, he replied, "Hey, Emily. I know we don't talk about Mom and Dad often, but I wanted to ask if you would be open to meeting with them. I understand they have been terrible, thus I do not hold you responsible for avoiding. Though they have been talking a lot about wanting to heal things with you, things are not ideal at home. I experienced a range of feelings. On the one hand, I had labored to establish limits and shield myself from the guilt-tripping and emotional manipulation my family had subjected me through. Conversely, this was my little brother, reaching out in a way that seemed real, and I couldn't simply dismiss him. I wasn't sure, though, whether I was ready to open that door once more, trying to be straight with him. "I don't know, Eli," I said. "I've spent a long time trying to move on. They have seriously damaged me. I get that. I'm not sure I could go back to the way things were. I absolutely do. It's just that things are difficult. Dad has been unwell once more. Mom, well, she is not handling it." I kept silent for a minute, thinking about what he said. She regrets a lot of what happened. Part of me yearned to atone, to believe they had changed and recognize the mistake of their ways. But I knew better than to enter something that would reignite past hurts. I had labored too hard to recover. "I will consider it," I responded at last. Still, I am not able to promise anything. Eli realized, and we left it at that. I too have to act in my best interest. I pondered what he said a lot after the call. Though I wanted to keep a relationship with Eli, I wasn't ready to forgive and forget, yet I also didn't want to shut the door totally. My connection with my mother and stepfather was so damaged that even the thought of sitting down with them seemed unworkable. But as life has a funny way of throwing curveballs, I turned out to make the right choice. A few weeks later, I received another call, this one from my mother. Hearing her voice surprised me, as I hadn't spoken to her since the legal mess. She sounded different, softer, nearly fragile. Emily said, stopping as though unsure of where to begin. The words hung in the air, weighted with years of tension and unresolved grief. "I know I don't deserve for you to listen to me, and I understand if you don't want to, but I need to apologize. I have given everything that has occurred much thought, regarding my treatment of you, how I let Greg push you aside, how I allowed money and avarice blind me. Although I want to try, I know I cannot undo what I have done. It was the apology I had been waiting years for, but hearing it now, I did not feel the gratification I expected. I miss you and I wish things ended differently. It did not remove the years of uncomfortable feeling, the lawsuits' betrayal, or ongoing manipulation. Still, it felt real, and that was something. I value you saying that, I answered warily. But you have to realize that things cannot simply revert to their former state. Mom, you mistreated me. Greg and you both accomplished this. I have developed a life for me that does not center on your approval or income. Our relationship has to be on my terms if we are to have any type of one. My mom was quiet for a long time. I won't allow guilt me into anything, and I won't participate in this family dynamic whereby I'm treated like an outsider. On the other side of the phone, I could hear her breathing and momentarily thought she may hang up. She then spoke once more, her voice loaded with feeling. "You are correct," she responded gently. "You owe nothing to us. Though it's just little steps, I simply want a chance to make things right." I didn't promise to anything at that moment, but I told her I would consider it. I felt a strange mix of relief, grief, and a small glimmer of optimism that perhaps, just maybe, things could be different when I hung up. I stayed away in the next weeks, but I let little gaps in the wall I had constructed around me. Eli and I kept texting, gently reconstructing a relationship that seemed more like actual family. I spoke with my mother a few more wary times, each one slightly less tense than the previous. Though I didn't jump into anything, I let myself think about the potential that healing was possible for me, as well as for them. Month after month, I concentrated more on creating the life I had always wanted. Along with starting business management classes and investing in more real estate, I started mentoring younger students at my former college. Returning felt like the proper thing to do, since I was carrying forward the knowledge life had imparted. I was different than I had been when I left my house. I felt clearer about what I wanted from the future, was more confident and stronger. Once a cause of great anxiety and turmoil, the inheritance had evolved into a tool for building the life I was due. Thanks in great part to financial advisors and a lot of reading, I had learnt to control it sensibly. More crucially, I had discovered that my value was not related to money. It related to the decisions I made for myself, not for anyone else, and the individuals I surrounded myself with. My family's impact on my life waned with time. They were still there, on the margins, but they no longer had the ability to inflict the kind of damage they once could have. Though it would never be how it previously was, my mother and I were gently reconstructing something, and that was good as well. Although I had come to see that some relationships would always have scars, it did not imply I would have to bear those scars eternally. Eli, on the other hand, told another tale. Over the next few years, he and I got closer, and I made a point to be there for him in ways none had been there for me when I was his age. Though we created new memories, going to his basketball games, helping him with school assignments, and simply being siblings in a manner we never had the chance to be, we hardly discussed the past. I discovered in him a real bit of family that felt valuable to hang on to. Regarding Greg, we never rebuilt our relationship. During the infrequent family get-togethers I went to, he and I exchanged polite greetings. However, that was it. I was good with it as I had no expectations from him. I had come to let go of the need for approval from those who had never really known me as family. Rather, I concentrated on the ones that did, on the connections I had fostered, the community I had created, and the family I had discovered in unlikely locations. Looking back, I see that my trip with my family was about more than just inheritance or money. It was about discovering who I was outside of their expectations and about advocating myself in ways I had not done previously. It was about deciding to create the life I wanted, even though it meant leaving people I previously thought I couldn't live without and finding the will to say no when it counted. I discovered at last that family is more than just blood. It's about the individuals who support you no matter what and stand by you during trying circumstances and see you for who you truly are. And perhaps it's about establishing your own family out of the people that make you entire, loved, and respected.